Welcome to the SB Nation College Football Selection Committee, as if any other sport could have something as ridiculous as something called the Selection Committee. I guess college basketball does, but whatever. My name is Dan Rubenstein. We are live from SB Nation Studios, well, really all over the country. I'm in New York. Jason Kirk joins us from Atlanta. Bud Elliott from somewhere in Florida. Spencer Hall may be here. Spencer, can you hear me? Well, Spencer does not have audio, but that shouldn't take away from the experience because it's a different kind of experience. Bill Connolly's in Missouri, and we are discussing who our top four as a collective unit and individually teams are in college football. Bud, since he is debuting headwear today, Bud, what was this weekend to you? What does it change, if anything?
I think the major takeaway this weekend was that Ole Miss's defense is still really good. But perhaps not perfect. You can run on them a little bit, especially if some of their key guys are out. And the offense, Bad Bo finally came back, and it was getting kind of old having to talk about Bad Bo.
Right.
And then he finally showed back up, and then at one point in that game, I was like, really, LSU? You're the one that's going to get dealt the Bad Bo card, and you're not going to cash this in. But they finally did, and that was good to see there. Young LSU team growing up and improving. That was kind of the major takeaway. Other than that, no real huge upsets on the weekend.
Jason, what was the takeaway? What was the story of the weekend to you, if not LSU and Ole Miss? Anything that cements your top four, changes your top four, or makes you think about anything in a different way than you were thinking, say, Thursday morning?
Yeah, I'd say so. Obviously, Ole Miss goes down, and they were my number one, so I was the wrongest person here based on that. Mississippi State, I'd bump them up to number one. I don't know any argument against MSU being number one right now, despite the fact that they really haven't dominated that many good teams. LSU came back on them. A&M put up some garbage time on them. Auburn even was right there with them in total yardage in that game. And then had a tough time. Needed an onside kick return touchdown to beat Kentucky by 2 scores.
Right.
It's just Mississippi State. Not only are they the number one team in the country, that alone is weird enough. It's also weird that the country's number one team and undisputed best team is one that's not all that proven, if you really look at how they've won, but there's nobody else.
There is nobody else at this point, given their multitude of wins. Bill, what did this weekend do for you in terms of making the top four a clearer picture, if anything?
Well, according to the numbers I just posted, Florida State really struggled with bye this week. They fell back a few spots again. Basically, the numbers just hate Florida State, and I programmed it that way.
Numbers are haters. We've established that.
Yeah, I programmed it specifically to hate them. So, besides that, the big thing is Ole Miss just because, they're still very, very good, but they got, bitten by the wrong injuries at exactly the wrong time, and, we can at least stop feeling guilty about bringing up Bad Bo again because it had been a while. And I started feeling like we were the ones just furthering it, and then he reminded us why we were furthering it. So, that has to be the big story. Otherwise, everybody just bumps up a spot. Ole Miss is still right there. They beat Alabama and Auburn. They're probably right back in. Michigan State looked good. We'll go with that.
Michigan State looked good. Oregon, obviously, in or around the top four. Bill, does it change anything for you with how shaky their defense looked, or is that a case in your mind that Cal's been putting up points and yards on everybody, and Oregon gave up the sort of average and survived?
Right. Oregon definitely does not have an elite defense by any stretch of the imagination, but with that pace against a good offense, you're going to give up points and yards. And so, I've been encouraged with the way the offense has rounded back into form lately, or is beginning to round back into form. Mm-hmm. And the defense is good enough when the offense is clicking at its highest level. So they're right there for me. Spencer,
can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can, loud and clear. What did this weekend? I'm very excited because we couldn't in a few seconds ago. What did this weekend spell out for you in terms of what you feel more sure of and more unsure of?
I feel less sure that we're going to have an easy time selecting the 4 or the 3 spot than I did before.
Yeah.
I think that number 2 spot is probably going to be pretty difficult as well. Most people can come to a consensus on what they think the definitive number 1 team is, and I feel like for most people, lazily or not, that's going to be the SEC champion, provided the SEC champion has 1 loss. After that, you're going to end up with a nightmarish knot of 1-loss teams and possibly a 2-loss team that somebody's going to try to wedge into this formula. So I feel less sure about that. I also feel more sure, by the way, about the long-term success of Mississippi State.
Yeah.
But just because at this point, the way that their offense is set up, they've got enough people that you have to tackle one-on-one. And they have two people out of the backfield that make that extremely difficult.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what a spread offense does for you at its best. It reduces you to one-on-one tackles. And as you've seen with Dak Prescott and now this weekend Josh Robinson, you can't make all the one-on-one tackles against either one of them. So they're going to be consistently productive down the stretch. If you watch, Kentucky is a really good 5-3 team.
Mm-hmm.
I know they lost to Florida. Don't count that against them. They were superb. By the way, same for Oregon this weekend. You know, Oregon beating Cal is a chore. I'm not saying it's necessarily the most fun you'll have. It is a chore. And they did it, and they did it definitively. Cal's going to turn every game into a 4.5-hour-long slog of passes and clock stoppages. Kentucky's going to be extremely physical, and they're going to challenge you just enough on offense to keep up. Mississippi State doesn't appear to have much of an offensive line. They don't appear to have much of a consistent defense.
Right.
But they have enough to be an accessory to an outstanding first-rank offense that's just capable of making first downs when they need it.
Jason, who are your top four?
I've got Mississippi State number 1, and Ole Miss, I'm only bumping them down to number 2. I think that is a highly forgivable loss. It could have came down to the final play, which, as Bud mentioned, that's when bad Dr. Bo struck. Otherwise, the rest of their resume, I think it stacks up very well against everyone in the country. That was the only time they've even been really challenged all year, considering the game against Alabama was probably not as close as it looked. Just based on the sheer number of time spent being challenged, I think they're second behind only Mississippi State among the contenders so far this season. Number 3, FSU jumps up a little bit based on the win over Clemson. I think that's it looks better by the week. That's a good defense.
Mm-hmm.
And then also Bama probably giving up a few too many points to Tennessee. I think that's sort of rearranged that a little bit. Would have Bama at number 4, but I'm kind of tired of having just a rotating list of SEC West teams here. So I'm going TCU just because we get to talk about TCU at this point. They scored 82 points. We're talking about a Gary Patterson coach program that joined the Big 12 and decided to join the dark side. Just embrace the madness. Become, don't obsess with having excellent defense. Still have a good enough defense, but if it means hiring 2 points-crazy air raid offensive coordinators to run the offense together, if that's what it takes to win in the Big 12, then do it. So I just feel like saying nice things about Gary Patterson for doing that, because not every coach is that willing to completely change everything about their program.
Totally true. Bud, who is your top 4 as it stands going into Week 10?
I actually think you could probably make a case for Florida State to be number 1 right now. If you compare the wins, Mississippi State against Florida State, Mississippi State has a home win over a top 5, top 10 Auburn team. Florida State has a home win over Notre Dame. Mississippi State has a win over LSU now, a pretty impressive road win there.
True.
Against a top 20 type team.
Right.
Florida State now beat Clemson without Jameis Winston, another top 20 type team. So fairly even there. I'm probably still going to give the edge to Mississippi State because I think they look more impressive, especially with how they took care of LSU. But I don't think it's all that clear-cut at all. Number 3 for me is going to be TCU. They've really been destroying people. The one loss to Baylor is a pretty good loss, and that went really back and forth. If we're not going to punish SEC teams for close losses, then we really shouldn't punish teams from other conferences for those losses either. And then I think Oregon is my number 4. The Michigan State win looks better and better at this point. They look fairly impressive against Cal. They kind of throttled down a little bit, but then were able to turn it back on there in the second half to cover the spread nicely. Thank you very much, Ducks. And so Mississippi State, FSU, close. TCU, Oregon is my top 4.
Going into what looks like a particularly tricky game for Florida State Thursday night on the road against what I think we can generally consider to be a top 5 national defense at this point, just in terms of how many things they do well. Louisville team. If Florida State hit 100 in terms of peak Florida State last season, in terms of doing everything, staying healthy, executing everywhere, where is this year's team on that scale?
Probably like a 70. They've had a lot of issues with just not being able to have guys in practice for various reasons. A lot of them are kind of we always hear the NFL guys, hey, he didn't practice this week, but he's going to go.
Right.
That's sort of how they've been having to handle all these situations. I think Louisville's defense regardless, is still a really good defense. It's still Petrino with extra rest and extra time to get ready, so you'll know he'll have some wrinkles. They'll probably hit a big play or two on this FSU defense, which is not a juggernaut at this point at all. It's certainly a worrisome game. I think the spread of single digits is very fair.
All right, Spencer, who is your top 4 and who is just outside of that top 4?
Top 4 at the moment would be Florida State, Mississippi State. I have Oregon in there, and I still have Notre Dame in there because I'm not going to punish them. But I could just go ahead and drop Notre Dame. This is different than the 4 I published on early Sunday morning, but I reserve the right to do that because it'll probably change tomorrow too. The more I think about it,
right?
You could just in that 5, 6, 7 space, by the way, put in any number of the teams that any of y'all have mentioned. You can put in TCU because TCU, per Bill's excellent stats and per Football Outsiders work, is just as effective as any other team in the country. You can make an argument for Alabama. You're going to get this argument, and frankly, it's a really hard one. Why would you put in Oregon if you don't have Alabama in there at the moment? Okay, sure. Both one-loss teams with the sort of countervailing losses that are almost equivalent when you look at them in terms of overall quality. Because Arizona's looking better and better. Mm-hmm. A lot of this, of course, is going to depend on your polling down the stretch, right? Which is why everyone wants to root. Repeating this again, you want to root for that one team that beat you, because you want them to be as strong a loss as possible going into that. So I think that's also there. There are a lot of one-loss teams just lurking, just sitting there, right there, who are going to be able to make a case at the end of the season. All right. And what if the only one-loss team out of the Pac-12 is Arizona State, who had a skunk of a loss?
They did.
Had a really good team sitting on the outside due to magnitude of loss down the stretch. Also, I'm not really overly concerned about either Mississippi State or Florida State making it undefeated all the way, because I think both of them suffer a loss down the stretch. Mississippi State's just one injury away in the backfield from doing that, and Florida State's just begging for a loss. I think Louisville's a really tough matchup for them. It could be this week.
Bill, I don't remember if I asked for your top 4. What is your top 4 if I didn't?
You mean it wasn't going to be that memorable to you that no, I think if Florida State doesn't lose this week, they've been begging, but they might not succeed in losing.
Right.
Miami is better, but who else? They're Virginia and BC at home, I think. No, I would have Mississippi State 1, Florida State 2. I really like TCU more than my numbers do. My numbers don't love them, but
right.
My numbers I like them quite a bit. I like TCU a lot. I think they're passing every test except the play 5 to 10 extra minutes in Waco, those last 5 or 10 minutes. And 4, I was actually going to have Alabama, and then I realized until everybody's played round robin and beat each other up, I kind of have to go Ole Miss if I'm going to Alabama because Ole Miss won that game. So that's my 4 for now.
All right, my 4, Mississippi State, Florida State. I'm going to go Oregon, TCU. Just right now, I like their wins. Alabama's best win at this point, and Alabama looks very good, but their best win's West Virginia, I believe, right? Texas A&M looking worse and worse by the week, and I'm very eager in a positive way to see Alabama against Mississippi State, against Auburn, obviously at the end of the year. These teams are against LSU. This is going to offer so much in the way of insight.
I think that's exactly the point, Dan, is that, hey, look, Bama has looked impressive against some lesser competition, but they have the games coming up. Let them prove it down the line. If they're really that good, they'll do it.
Absolutely. 59-0 against A&M, though. 59-0 Like that's
not insignificant.
We're getting to the point.
That's not a loss. That's a pathology.
Yeah, we're getting to the point where it's not just who you beat; it's how you beat them.
This is true.
Everybody's got a loss, except for 2 teams. Everybody's beating good teams. Everybody,
Oh no, we are nitpicking and
run together and beating an SEC team with 5 stars on it by 59 points. That counts as 2 wins.
No, this is totally true. And if you're going to tell me like Alabama's one of the best 4 teams in the country, I'll say, okay. I mean, we're all guessing, and nobody really knows at this point. Bill, my question to you, especially as somebody who doesn't fully trust his own numbers, which I appreciate, where is the cutoff point? And I'll read the AP rank right now. So 4 is Auburn, Michigan State, Oregon, Notre Dame, Georgia, Ole Miss, TCU, Kansas State, Baylor, Ohio State. To you, where is the tier cutoff? Is Georgia below Notre Dame? Is Georgia a tier below because of that South Carolina loss, or are they looking better and better with how they've dominated and played since losing Todd Gurley?
They have improved significantly over the last month. Early on it was basically great, terrible, great, terrible. It's been a while since they looked bad. And so, I mean, I think they absolutely – they're not in the Mississippi State, Florida State tier, obviously, but in terms of the one-loss teams, you have to count them. Put them at the bottom of that tier of one-loss teams, but they're still absolutely in the running, and they can still end up looking very much like an elite team in late November.
Jason, only one of these teams, to my knowledge, shut out what we consider to be at least an okay team this week, and we haven't spoken about them yet, Kansas State. Are you a believer because they can play defense and generally control the ball on offense and make people look terrible and uncomfortable like they did to Auburn earlier in the year, even in a loss? Are you somebody that believes in Kansas State at this point?
I think it is wise to always believe in Kansas State, at least Bill Snyder, Kansas State, until proven otherwise, and it is yet to be proven otherwise. That loss against Auburn could have gone either way, holds up very well.
Mm-hmm.
The things they do are the things they always do. They make very few mistakes. They hang on to the football, and then when they have the football, they make you defend a whole lot of stuff that's really hard to defend. The Big 12 is pretty much it's kind of a shame because it's just going to eat itself, and it's hard to picture a team getting out of there with 2 or fewer losses. A championship game might have helped, might have hurt, but if we get to the end of the year and we're looking at a situation where the Big 12 doesn't have a team in there, that's a shame to me because K-State, TCU, West Virginia, Baylor, Oklahoma, those are all playoff contender teams, and things are very unlikely to break out that way.
Spencer, the 3 best conferences in America all look like they're going to be in a position to cannibalize itself. The Big 12, the SEC, and the Pac-12. The Big 10, though, does not look to be in that specific position. Michigan State, another very nice win, cruising over Michigan. And Ohio State, a tight win. What did this past weekend tell you about the matchup coming up and tell you about those teams in general?
Ohio State, for me, it hasn't changed much. I only think they've changed in degree. They're still primarily an offensive team with a very limited defense in terms of what they can do. Penn State is not a good team offensively. No. Not at all. Defensively, they've got ponies aplenty. But offensively, their offensive line played a lot better against Ohio State. But as you saw at the end of the game, you can still literally throw one of them into the quarterback. So probably not a real great indicator of the overall strength of Ohio State's defense. I think that's illusory. I think if they do eventually get to the Big Ten title game, I think they'll lose. Michigan State's still the team for me out of the Big Ten. They're the most complete team. And hey, what's that one loss? Oh, it's to Oregon on the road, in a game that they really did well in about 60% of the game.
Yep.
About 40% of it they got pass happy. Put them in bad field position, and they ended up losing on the road. They'll have a really good claim to a spot in the title if they get there. And frankly, I have faith in them just defensively to make it past round 1 and into the final. That's how good they are and how good they've been defensively.
Bud, heading into Week 10, if you had to buy one SEC West team and then subsequently one SEC champion, I don't know if they're one and the same, but who do you feel most confidently about looking forward in the next 5 weeks?
I'm going to have to say Alabama, I think, just because they play defense, and it's a little bit scary to back Alabama here because most of their tough games are still upcoming. A few of these other SEC West teams have already banked up wins, and Bama has not. But on the flip side, everybody's got to go to Bama. Auburn goes Tuscaloosa.
Mm-hmm.
They already played Ole Miss, so they can't lose that again. They do have to go to Death Valley, but I think Bama, looking at the LSU Ole Miss tape, will probably be able to make some adjustments there. I think they'll actually be okay there, especially against that run game. I think Bama is better equipped to stop a straight-ahead run game than maybe Ole Miss was. And then Mississippi State has to head to Tuscaloosa as well, and they don't have anybody else tough from the East. So I'm going to have to back Bama there. I think they'll be favored by at least a touchdown in all the remaining games.
Bill, a team outside of the top 11, so Baylor, Ohio State, Arizona, Nebraska, LSU, Utah, Oklahoma. Which one of those to you passes your own personal eye test, passes your numbers test, and do you sort of just believe in?
Well, I think Baylor. We've seen what their potential is when they don't suffer injuries. Now everybody suffers injuries, and
Sure.
you have to fight through those too. And they've had some pretty ill-timed ones, I guess, like Ole Miss did the other day. But I mean, I still think that's a team that we know has a really, really high upside. That when the game is being called like they want it to be called on defense, They have a very, very salty, tough defense to go with that offense. And the defense is good enough to where even if the offense isn't, just rolling, they can be just about anybody. But they need a specific type of game called. I think that's certainly what we figured out. But I mean, of that batch of teams, I think that's the one I trust the most. Maybe Ohio State, but I think Baylor right now.
Jason, we're going to go out on the longest hypothetical limb, but the sort of fear at this point with cannibalization everywhere is that perhaps a 2-loss SEC team could be left out in place of 1-loss Big 12, 1-loss Big 10, 1-loss Pac-12, Notre Dame. Do you believe a 2-loss SEC team, especially coming from the West, is more deserving? Do you feel like that strength, or is it a case-by-case with non-conference? Where is your line in the sand when it comes to a team with more losses jumping a team with fewer?
I think in general, without talking about specifics, you can make a very strong case that the average strength of schedule and resume so far of that SEC West cluster is probably better than most of the contenders in other conferences. But if it's a 1-loss Big 12 champion getting in, sorry, if you didn't win your conference, you're behind a 1-loss Big 12 champion this year. That I have no problem with that at all. If it's a Big Ten champion besides Michigan State, if it's Nebraska or Ohio State, then there's a pretty big argument there, because we're talking about a Nebraska team that with a good win over Miami, but otherwise they get to play against the Big Ten West, and Ohio State with a blowout loss at home to Virginia Tech that continues to be the most baffling result of the year. If it's a Pac-12 team besides Oregon, then there are questions to raise, but Oregon played Michigan State. So I think there's a list of teams that are, certainly, if they're ahead of a 2-loss SEC West team, then that's just the way it is. But we'll have to see, because conference championships, I think, is going to be very important to the actual committee, because they don't want to look like they're just a same as the old boss 2011 BCS scenario all over again.
Right. Spencer, where's your line in the sand when it comes to losses, when it comes to perhaps number of conference games? Some play 8, the SEC and the Big 10 play 8, the Big 12 and Pac-12 play 9, the ACC plays 8. And how much does non-conference scheduling, does strength of schedule, does winning a division or conference matter to you as for your line in the sand?
It matters quite a bit, especially because if you're looking at data and you just want to establish the maximum number of points, the people who play an additional game have an additional game. And that is a tautology that has, I think, a lot of value, because you are getting an additional game against a quality opponent, right? In most cases, unless we're talking about the ACC, the person coming from the team coming from the other side of the conference is going to be pretty good. That really may not be the case in the ACC. We could have one of those awful 4-4 knots there, right? Like, we're just everybody, this car crash of mediocre teams ends up facing Florida State, because they play that super tough ACC schedule. But we can't count that. If Florida State wins out, they're still a conference champion. This is just me slagging on Florida State. But I will go ahead and make the case that, if you play that championship game and you win, it has value. And if you want to know the most likely way a 2-loss team is going to sneak into this, it's that. If you're coming out of a power conference, if you have 2 losses, and if those 2 losses are deemed to be something like a quality loss, that's what you could get. The 2-loss team, I don't know, like LSU, that somehow manages to stumble in. I don't even know if LSU could do that, but that's the case. We've had this before. You've had a 2-loss team in the BCS title before. It could certainly happen in the playoff.
I'm on that same note. Georgia could very easily lose 2, but one of those is a quality loss in their non-conference that they scheduled to be a good game against Clemson. They beat Clemson, but they could lose to, let's say, Georgia Tech. They have quality non-con. They're not going to.
Could.
They could.
Yeah.
But the reality is they're playing 8 conference games and 2 quality non-conference games. So a Georgia team that loses twice, I don't blame them as much. Bill, you said you have a scenario that you feel like could be curious and interesting.
Well, it just kind of hit me that I put 2 and 2 together on these things. So the committee is basically putting out a weekly poll. And I've complained about that like 28 times, so I won't bother going through the same arguments as normal. But the committee has also said, well, we're going to value conference titles. So what happens after week 14? You're heading into week 15, and Alabama or the SEC West runner-up is sitting there at number 4. Michigan State is a number 6, 7, 8, something like that, and they beat Nebraska or somebody in the title game. Do they jump all the way to number 4? based solely on that conference title that is supposed to be extra valuable? How does that, that's going to result in some really funky jumps at the last second based on who did or didn't, and Michigan State beating Nebraska shouldn't alone probably jump you up 3 spots.
So in that scenario, if Alabama's at number 4 at that point, we're going to assume that Ole Miss wins the SEC West and wins their tiebreaker because
I guess
otherwise Alabama, if they're number 4 in the country, they probably don't lose a second time at that point.
I mean, put anybody, put Ole Miss there, put Mississippi
Sure.
State. All those SEC West teams are going to end up with pretty similar resumes. Whoever finishes second, if they get to 11-1.
Yeah, I think the context of how they win and who they are beating, I think matters. Obviously, we don't know, but yeah, no, it is an interesting thing. If Michigan State goes and blasts Nebraska and beats them twice this year, and Alabama simply doesn't play in it,
well, what if they don't?
I'm willing to accept it. What?
Yeah, I think Bill's point is we're going to see some convenient rankings reshufflings after that round of conference championship when, hey, this team was 7th and they won a pretty good game, and now all of a sudden they're 3rd. That's weird.
Yeah.
Just because the criteria they've laid out is that conference titles are extremely important. Well, nobody's won a conference title in October 28th. So how does that change your rankings over the course of the year once those come into play?
I do think the chance, though, that we have a 2 one-loss SEC West teams at the end of the year is pretty low. There's a lot of games. I mean, it's got to be really low. I don't have the math on it, but it's pretty hard to figure out a scenario of that.
Well, certainly, but I mean, just in general, you're going to see things. You're going to potentially see teams jump extra in that final rankings, not only because of what the game they won, but because of the mythical. Now they have a trophy in the background, and that doesn't really do much for me.
So do we anticipate them sort of giving extra weight to, let's say, conference leaders, like the leading team in the conference, week to week? That way it doesn't, it's not such an obvious jump at the end?
That just gets so gross, though. I don't like that at all. But
yeah, I mean, because schedules are so different.
It's going to get a lot grosser once you start measuring this against that sort of irrational buoyancy of preseason rankings. For instance, do we really have Alabama as high as they are because of what you've seen on the field, or do you have them that high because of the combination of reputation and of what you've seen on the field? Because what I've seen on the field is pretty inconsistent against a lot of different kinds of teams. They've been awesome. They've been mediocre. They've been both. So my counter argument to that is 2 things. One, you shouldn't put out that poll. Like they should have just come out and said, here's our rankings. So saith the wizard.
Right.
Right.
Where they are.
Maybe do it once mid-season.
Right.
But when they put it out, lots of people will click on websites to read it. So I'm fine with that.
That's fine with that. I think we're all okay with money. But at the same time, the other thing that is the real problem with this is that they do have to value those, so they are going to have to make that jump. They are going to have to say that, oh yeah, 1 game jumps you 4 spots. So it's going to be bad either way.
True. Bill, because you wrote about how they're sort of stat unfriendly in their requirements and their metrics as they look at teams, what do you expect their top 4, based on what they've laid out as what they're going to look at? If you had to guess what theirs would be, not what yours or any of ours would be, what do you expect?
Well, the top 2 are obvious. I mean, maybe you flip Mississippi State and Florida State, but you've got to figure they're the top 2. After that, I don't know. I would assume that Ole Miss is still up there pretty high.
Okay.
But if we're talking about valuing titles and maybe easing it in or something, maybe an Oregon or Michigan State gets up there a lot higher than we've maybe thought, like say last week or something like that. So that's what I'm really, really curious about. I think that will hint at what they're thinking is moving forward. But in the end, I think we're going to see a poll. This is a poll. It's going to look almost exactly like the AP poll every week, and it is what it is.
What would you expect, Jason, to be the craziest possible chaotic outcome given where we look at Week 10 now?
Just for this week coming up?
Not for this week coming up, but based on where we are right now and what is possible. What is your, we didn't see this coming in Week 10 scenario for the end of the season?
Well, one, Spencer mentioned it already, and some people are sort of picking up on it, that this year is a whole lot like 2007. And when things go crazy, Les Miles tends to tend to go very well for him. Yes, LSU is still in the running. If they win from here on out, they are in. I don't anticipate that happening, but that's a team that's improving from week to week, that has gotten a good chunk of its challenging games out of the way. and I think matches up sort of well with if they play Georgia. Georgia's tough to run on, but other than that, I think they can stop Georgia. So if you want a crazy scenario, there's never anything crazier than LSU, and they're still in it.
Bud, what do you expect to happen this weekend in terms of teams that are near the top? Oregon has Stanford, Florida State, of course, Louisville, ASU has Utah. I'm trying to think of other games at or near the top. TCU has West Virginia. Do you expect movement? Do you expect all sorts of shuffling, or do you expect we're talking about the same teams next week?
I think more than likely we'll be talking about most of the same teams. I think all those teams are favored, I believe. But the TCU game at West Virginia is certainly interesting. I mean, obviously, Florida State and Louisville is as well. We already talked about that with Spencer earlier. TCU has been playing so well within the state of Texas. Now they have to go. West Virginia it's a tough road trip to make. We see West Virginia not always play so well on the road, a lot better at home. So some pretty pronounced home road splits there for them. So I'm interested to see how TCU does taking it on the road.
Spencer, what do you expect out of this weekend? A good slate that could see some changes in the top 10, 15, 20.
I think there'll be further confusion in the Big 12 because I think you could get a pretty inconclusive result in TCU, West Virginia. I think that you could get additional chaos out of the SEC. You're going to get an even more muddied picture out of the Pac-12 because they're going to knock off another one-loss team. Same for the SEC, Auburn, and Ole Miss. One of them has to lose that game, believe it or not. And so I think you'll just see further layering and confusion. This is all setting up to my nightmare scenario, which is the one I actually kind of want to happen because I'd like to see as disastrous a scenario as possible. That would be Pac-12 champion Utah playoff. I'd like to see Michigan State in the playoff as the one-loss Big Ten champion. I'd like to see Duke out of the ACC.
Naturally.
One-loss Duke. And then a two-loss LSU team that wins everything. That's what happens. Les Miles wins.
He's standing atop the skulls of everybody else.
I don't want this with my heart. I want this with the most evil part of my brain, which I know this is what's going to happen. I know.
Jason, what do you see happening this weekend? Where is the biggest possibility for change? What do you feel the most confident in? I should also mention Georgia plays, Florida?
Florida.
Yeah.
Georgia's starting on its SoCon portion of its schedule a little early.
Also, Arizona has UCLA, which could, I guess, technically get interesting. But where do you expect change? Where do you expect cementing?
Yeah, the Pac-12 South has a whole lot going on this week. Utah plays, is it Arizona?
Arizona State.
Arizona State, yeah, one of them. So there's a whole lot of sorting out to do there because we're looking at several quality one-loss teams all bunched ahead of USC and UCLA. Also, as Bud mentions, TCU going to West Virginia. TCU wins that. They're in the top 3 without question across the board. If they lose, then the Big 12's probably out of the top 4 for a week or two at least. Right there. And then you have Ole Miss and Auburn. Winner of that game's got a very good case to be right back in it as well. So, a lot going on this week.
Bill, where do you expect possible Week 10 chaos? What are you confident near the top?
Well, I will point out to Spencer another potential aspect of a nightmare scenario is a 10-2 Big 12 champion West Virginia.
Also true.
Just with 2 really nice losses.
I want that with my heart and soul, though.
That's the difference.
Part of the brain.
There's nothing equal about wanting West Virginia to win the Big 12.
No, I think TCU handles that game. Actually, I mean, I really like TCU, and I think that does vault them into a pretty solid top 4 spot, be it 3rd or 4th. Otherwise, I just expect to finally. This is going to be the clearest verdict we're going to have about Florida State. We're not going to get a clear verdict at this point. But if they can survive at Louisville in like a weird Thursday night atmosphere against a really, really good defense, I assume they will because of Louisville's quarterback situation, but that's still a really nice hurdle to clear, and so we'll know a lot more about Florida State at that point. So basically, my weekend's over after Thursday night.
All right, this has been the selection committee, so I'm going to finish on one question that has nothing to do with anything, but we were talking about it in the office, and I like putting you guys on the spot. So we're going to start with Bud. Bud, if you could be trained in any gymnastics event, which do you think you could succeed in to the highest degree?
Oh, shit.
So you got the pommel horse, you got the uneven bars, you got the high bar, you got the rings, you got the floor, you got the vault.
My shoulder is still pretty screwed up, so the rings are out. Actually, I have decent balance.
Okay. They got the beam. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to say the balance beam, just because that's probably best conducive to my skills.
Are you somebody that can do a flip off like a diving board, a backflip into the pool? Do you have that?
Yeah, if you gave me a diving board, I could.
Okay.
I can't just do like a standing backflip.
Spencer, the gymnastics event.
No.
Okay, Jason.
If I had to try one, I'd at least try rings, because I'm pretty sure I could just get up there and hold it.
Yeah, it's very solidly upper body.
Yeah, so that's it. That's all. That's my whole move. There's no iron cross. There's just I get up, I do a muscle up, and then I stay there for 2 minutes.
Fair enough. Jason, what do you feel like you have in you?
I'm going to go vault. My only real athletic talent is being able to run in a straight line, and all you got to do there is you got to run and bounce off a thing. I think I can handle vault. I'm not very strong up here, but if you need something taken from this spot to that spot, I can take it there.
Bill, please tell me you were a gymnast growing up and mastered the uneven bars and have a Missouri Junior State Championship.
I mean, I can tell you that if you want me to. I think give me the high bar. I think I could do this. I think I could basically swing around and then eventually flip off and maybe not land on my head. So
how's your balance?
It has its moments.
That's a great answer. I'm going to go with the vault just because it's the quickest. It really is. I think Jason has a point. You just run, you hit it, you see what you have, maybe you get lucky and you twist and you don't even mean to and you land it, and I think that's the way to go. I don't know who else. Is there anybody else at SB Nation that you feel like could succeed in terms of gymnastics? I'm trying to think of names. No.
I want Matt Uppert on floor exercise.
Yeah, no, he does have a certain rhythm to him.
Yeah.
And grace. I could see that. All right, that's as good a time to go out as any. Everybody, make sure you're on SBNation.com each and every day. Read EDSBS, read Football Study Hall, read SB Nation Live every Saturday because we're all having all sorts of fun in there. Of course, SB Nation Recruiting, Tomahawk Nation, all the things. SBNation.com. Thanks for watching, and we will see you next week.